Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri for Gorilla Poker. In this video, I'm going to be continuing with the theme of reviewing a session that I've already recorded. And as I mentioned in the first video where I started reviewing this session, for various reasons, I've been on tilt lately and I talked about what I call the circle of death as far as poker tilt is concerned. Before starting the review, I wanted to share a story with you guys about the first time that this kind of thing happened to me, which was about 1 year into my poker career. What happened to me as I was playing was I was moving up stakes and doing really well, and most of my play was on a site called Full Tilt Poker, which I don't know how many of you guys know these days. What happened was something called Black Friday, where because of US regulations, a few of the sites operating in the US were shut down there, and what happened was that Full Tilt Poker was unable to pay out its balance to people. So at this point, my total bankroll for poker was something like $20,000. I was playing up to 3-6. Of those $20,000, I think 17,000 were on Full Tilt Poker and 3,000 were on Poker Stars. So those $17,000 on Full Tilt Poker were frozen. As far as I knew indefinitely, maybe I'd get them back one day, maybe not. It wasn't very clear at that point in time. I will mention that in the end, I did end up getting them back. Maybe it was 2 years later or something like that. At this point in time, it was a very significant amount of money for me. Poker was my only source of income. I was living with a few roommates who were also playing poker. Our lease just ended. I moved into a new apartment and started the next kind of school year and poker year on Poker Stars with a $3,000 bankroll. And you know, up until then, I'd been maybe a 10 BB per 100 winner over the sample I had moving up stakes. I'd been running really well. But with a $3,000 bankroll, I figured I'd move down to 25.50 cents. Be conservative. That's 60 buy-ins, I think, for those stakes. So decided to move down there and grind it out and rebuild my bankroll as fast as possible. And what happened, surprisingly for me, is that like a 10 BB winner, higher stakes, I was sure I'd crush, but I just got stuck. I couldn't make progress. I was kind of breaking even. I think it took 3 or 4 months of me constantly breaking even until I started a process that slowly helped me snap out of it. What I did back then was I started out by taking a week off. I reduced volume. I started with The Mental Game of Poker by Jared Tendler, book that really helped me, and I started actually doing the exercises and journaling, doing a tilt journal and stuff like that. I started working more with other players, more with a coach. That coach was Grindcore, who is actually working for Gorilla Poker these days. We're still in touch. And then slowly things started clicking back together and I started crushing again. It was a tough period for me mentally, and as I've mentioned, as a coach, I see people going through these a lot. So I'm in one of these right now, not taking it personally. This is part of the job when you're a poker player, is to recognize, slow down, and take the necessary steps. You know, very often there's, for me, there was always some kind of entitlement. Like, you know, I should have a bankroll to play 2-4 and 3-6. I should have these $17,000. And that kind of switches something in your brain where you feel like you deserve the money rather than you feel like you need to work hard and make the best decision. And it's these small nuances that can turn you from a big winner to a break-even or losing player. So, long intro aside, let's dive into the footage. I'm continuing the last session. We'll pause and just review interesting pots and run you guys through my post-game thoughts, and we'll see how well or how badly I played given the tilt. Okay, first hand I have Jack 8 of diamonds BVB. I cannot imagine I don't VPIP this hand. Personally, if you asked me, this hand should call. And I see myself quickly 3-betting it. It's not like it has to always call, but I think I like to structure my 3-bet ranges where if I'm 3-betting like a suited connected playable hand, I would like it to be one that happily calls a 4-bet. And Jack 8 suited is getting to the point where it's borderline. Borderline 3-bets are, you know, borderline calling a 4-bet tends to mean you lose the max EV versus a 4-bet. So personally, I would rather 3-bet like Jack 10, Jack 9, call the Jack 8, and then 3-bet Jack 6, Jack 5. It's kind of from memory. I always wing preflop ranges a bit. I'm not like memorizing them one-to-one, but more the principles. So let me quickly pop up a different stakes chart. This is in position BBB 3-bet range for 2 KNL ranges, which for what it's worth we sell on the Gorilla Poker website if you guys want to check those out, which come with a printable chart and everything. What you guys can see here is that there is this gap with suited cards where there are suited connected hands that get 3-bet less or that barely get 3-bet. I think clearest is you can see 8-5 suited, Jack-7 suited, King-8 suited. Like there are these in-between hands between presumably 3-betting and comfortably calling a 4-bet, which you would do with a King-10 suited, or, you know, hating to fold and then not minding to fold, like Jack-Deuce suited or whatever. So I feel like, you know, Jack-8 suited is in the 3-bet range, so not a big deal. But as far as principles, I think as I was playing, I was not thinking too much about these things, and like these are the hands I try to avoid, even if they're there a little bit. Jack-8, Jack-7, 10-7. Because as long as you avoid these, you're getting the 3-bet range, alright. Okay. Yeah, get the fold. Okay, next hand I have Queen-9 off. I imagine I'm gonna VPIP this big blind versus button. So let's see what happens. We get, oh, nice board, Jack-10 deuce two-tone. So to pause, you know, ever since I've done the check raising course, I am more prone to thinking about check raising ranges and which hands and what to do. So it comes naturally to think of this hand as a check raise. It definitely has all the properties for check raising fairly often. So I would imagine I do that. The only thing we need to see is whether villain bets, what's his sizing, stuff like that. Maybe he checks back and I can't check raise, but yeah, he does check back. So kind of interesting spot. What we saw on the top left is, first of all, villain is checking back a board that's like a clear theoretical 100% bet board for him. But, you know, it's 1 KNL. Players are going to have a bunch of theoretical mistakes. It's perfectly fine. Here we have a few different things going on. Number one, it came in ace. Generally, when people check back, high cards are good for the guy who checked back. And especially the ace is good, so you don't want to be very aggressive on this kind of card. And then kind of the counterpoint to that is that the flush is bad for him, and I do get to be aggressive on the flush. So I would imagine a hand like Queen-9 with a 9 of diamonds is actually just a hand that wants to straight up bet. I kind of want my betting range to beat a hand like Ace-5. Sizing's definitely not going to be small for betting, but should be something biggish, like 75% pot or so. Looks like I decide to check, which if I would do, I would probably be going for a check raise. I think I like betting a bit more though, than checking with this hand. Villain checks back and river king of diamonds, so we river a fairly strong hand. Here this is, you have to count 1, 2, 3rd, not flush. In a check down pot, it's worth a decent amount of money. Having the queen is not ideal in terms of value betting because I want him to have the queen so he can call me. But yeah, it's a strong enough hand to bet. I'd say anywhere between 75% pot to 150% pot feels reasonable for this hand strength. And we'll see what I choose to do. The hand itself is slowly coming back to me as I'm reviewing it. So I go for 75%, which is fine. I think it's on the lower end. I'd like to see myself actually going bigger. And my opponent raises 4x my bet. Really interesting spot. It's kind of a spot which is tough to think about and tough to manage when you're on tilt. Kind of the first thing you need to have go through your head in these kind of bluff catching spots is, well, first of all, we realize my hand is a bluff catcher, right? Like this opponent is not raising a worse flush for value. So I beat only bluffs, and we want to think about the removal effects where, you know, obviously I'm going to have a diamond with any bluff catcher. This is not a particularly high one, so it's not a mandatory call. And then when we look at the kicker, queen is actually a good kicker for bluff catching. Villain will not be bluffing while holding a queen because a queen is a straight. He might bluff holding a 10 or a jack or a 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3 deuce. But presumably when he's holding, I guess, maybe even with a king, but I would guess when he's holding something like an ace or a straight, he's not going to be bluffing. So in this sense, it's a good bluff catcher. So an above average bluff catcher, which means if you ask PO, PO will say either this is a 0 EV mixed call or it's an always call and slightly winning. Those are the two options when you have a bluff catcher where both cards, don't block the bluffing range in any way. The rest of the analysis, and this is tough to do when you're tilted. When I'm tilted, I start with this and I generally finish with this part of the analysis. It's enough to push me to calling because, the rest of the analysis is a lot more difficult to put your finger on. It's a lot less scientific in a way, more feel-based and gut-based, and when you're on tilt, your gut wants to call, it wants to gamble, it wants to win the money you deserve back. So you put together as many puzzle pieces as you can. You think about timing and your opponent and the spot and some human psychology, and you try to do your best. And the lower in stakes you are, if it's not 25-50, don't stick to GTO too hard. You're playing against people and motivations are there. So first question is, why would someone value raise so big? Let's say he has a nut flush. He wants to get called, right? So why do you value raise this big? The second question would be, why would you bluff raise this big, right? Like the size feels a bit big to me. We'll start with that. But I think that's reasonable. It doesn't give you extra information. Because the guy started out by not c-betting the board that he's supposed to always c-bet, so expecting him to have like a technically good size. First of all, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is a technically good size, but I think you can't read too much into small technical details because there's no reason to think this guy has a very strong technical game, which is nothing against him for what it's worth. You can be a big winner without a very strong technical game. Next thing is, is this a tempting spot for someone to bluff raise? And here, I think that with everything that happened in the hand, you can see the answer is clearly no. So I want to run through the things that happened that make me think that this is a good spot for me to fold. And please, guys, in the comments, tell me if you agree or disagree, because I am being results oriented. I did call and I did lose in this hand. But is it, GTO call or a blunder, similar to last video? I'll let you guys decide what you think. What I think is, this guy on the flop and on the turn had two easy opportunities to bluff or put in money, and he didn't. And this generally indicates both a player type and emotional attachment. Someone who's fighting for every small pot would very likely have put in a bet earlier than this. Also very likely not have this river size because he's more geared towards how can I bluff cheaply. And the second the guy's not really a red line warrior, it's just not a very intuitive spot to run a bluff in. Like you check down to the river, someone bets, I presumably have a flush or a bluff. Why would you bluff raise? It's not a very intuitive human thing to do. Of course, if you're a sicko, you always think about the spot differently. You're like, okay, I get to this spot, what's my value range, what's my bluffing range? You start constructing things like that. But for most guys, when you get to the river, you look at your hand, you're in call or fold mode. You're not thinking about turning it into a bluff in some random, 5 big blind check down spot. So I think most people would have no bluffs. And if you put that together with the timing, I don't know if you guys noticed, but this guy tanked flop and he tanked the turn and he tanked the river. And tanking generally means, unless you tank everything always, that your hand had some connection to the board. If you had sixes, there's no need to tank flop, there's no need to tank turn. Generally, it's something more connected to the board, and again that pushes me in the direction of folding. So to me it seems pretty clear, pretty easy fold, and like I said, we see what I did. So decide to call, get shown queen jack with a jack of diamonds. Could run it through a solver, maybe I'm wrong. This looks to me bad on a bunch of levels in terms of his sizing and his line. I think his hand should, like I already said, it should always c-bet small, but I don't think you get to raise that big on the river with his hand strength. I could chalk it up and say, well, if he's raising the jack of diamonds, I'm calling the 9 of diamonds. I'm hardly getting exploited, right? Like this is exactly the hand that should always call, otherwise his raise is terrible. Or that you could rationalize it this way or that way. But I'm not trying to rationalize things in a GTO way. Like I said, I know GTO, my hand is fine to call. I think the spot is one in which you can just get away from. I could get away from when I'm playing well. And I was not playing well. My opponent did a bunch of things to give away that he's probably strong in terms of timing, not c-betting the flop, and all these things are there, they're real things, so I do think I messed up. It's a big mess up, guys. Like, if you think this, it costs 12 big blinds or whatever to call, and let's say you think the call, with everything I said, I'm not 100% right, let's say the call loses 3 big blinds. Losing 3 big blinds in a hand is a ton. It can completely destroy your win rate, right? Like, very, very, very quickly. And this might be a minus 10 BB losing call. So if I'm beating these games at 5 BB per 100, this could be like the win rate of next 200 hands gone. And I'm making these mistakes more than I care to. Okay, so video is kind of long so far. I'll say goodbye to you guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it's some food for thought in terms of GTO or blunder type hands. I really like those because poker is such a deep game where GTO is, in my eyes, a framework to think about things. But in the end, we're playing against humans and what we do matters so much more. Like, you can't say, oh, GTO and move on. Definitely, not when you're not playing against top players. Top of the world players, whatever. If you're a GTO machine, go ahead, be a GTO machine. But for most of us mortals who are not GTO machines, I wouldn't want anyone using GTO as an excuse. You can use it as part of your thought process, but not as your entire thought process. If you haven't, check out the Check Raising course, and see you guys next time.